This is another one of the stories that I wasn't going to tell. And I will limit what I tell you. I said in a previous episode that when I were in the clinic, I used to turn up early and old guys were already there. As I'd open the door, they'd come in, they all had their jobs, they'd fold towels, they'd put the coffee on, they'd do this, they'd do that, someone would vacuum, I'd be getting files organised, some would help me with that. And then we'd sit down around one of the treatment beds and pull out the paper and Sydney Morning Herald, and we'd read it and we'd talk and chat, laugh. Sometimes there were 5, 6, sometimes 2 or 3. And one day there, for a while it'd been quiet. I didn't have a lot of DVA patients. And some of these guys used to just come in for a chat. I had a gym down the back. They'd use the gym. They weren't actually under treatment, but it'd become a bit of a drop-in centre, and I loved it, truly loved it. This chap came up to me, and we were the only ones in the clinic at the time. And I'd spoken to him a couple of days before when he dropped in, and we'd talked and this and that. And he'd said to me, "I want to ask you something, Marty." I said, "Yeah, mate." He said, next time I'm in." "Yeah, righto." And he came in this day, he had the paper, and he also had a shopping bag, white plastic shopping bag. There was something heavy in the bottom of it. And we're sitting there talking, and I said to him, "What was the question you had to ask?" And he said, wait there. And he leaned down, because we're either side of a treatment bed, they're not real wide. The paper was spread out. And he said, "Just wait a minute." And he leaned down and he reached into his shopping bag and he brought out a tobacco tin, the old log cabin type tobacco tins. And he unscrewed it, like it rattled when he picked it up. And he unscrewed it and he pushed it forward. And there were these things in the bottom of it. And I looked at it and I struggled. I didn't know what they were. But I could see some of them were a bit shiny. And I said to him, "What are these?" And he said, "They're Japanese teeth." I didn't say anything. He said, "When we were in New Guinea," he said, "like I grew up with nothing." He said, "We went to New Guinea," and he said it was just horrific up there. He said, "Bodies." He said, there was a few of us, and we actually started taking the gold teeth out of dead Japanese. And he said it was going to set us up for life when we come home. He said I was never going to be poor again. He said I was going to come back and I was going to have something. And I didn't say anything. I just kept quiet, just let him speak, let it get it out. And he looked at me. And I said to him, "Well, what's the question?" And he said, "What do I do?" And I said, "Well, the war has been over for nearly 50 years. I said, "You've still got them." And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Marty, when we were over there, it was hell. It was awful." He said, "And when I came back, everything changed." He said, "I changed." And I said, "So what are you going to do with them?" And he said, "I was hoping you could tell me what I should do. And if you think you've ever felt the weight of responsibility, there's nothing like that." And I said to him, "I think no one would blame you after what you guys went through if you melted them down. They were taken from a dead men. I said, "That's the cold, harsh reality of it." I said, "I would understand it." I said, "Or you could go down to the Skillion." And for those that know the central coast of New South Wales, the Skillion is down at Terrigal, big sweeping headland, all lawn all the way to the top, with drop-offs on 3 sides into the sea. And I said, oh, you could go to the Skillion. I said, you could walk to the top, you could say a prayer and throw it out to sea. Anyway, he just sort of nodded at me, and he closed the lid, and he put it back in his bag, and he put the bag down beside him, and he leaned forward, and he said, what about, and pointed to an article in the Herald. We started talking. And I knew Bob. It's not Bob, it's just a name. I don't name them. I knew him for a couple of years. After that, it was never mentioned again. I don't know what he did. But Bob's lifestyle, which wasn't exactly extravagant, didn't change. So, but those words stuck with me ever since. You know, why didn't you do it? He said, well, when I come home, things changed. I changed. Yeah. And Bob had been carrying that for 50 years. Things that he did when he was, I don't think he would have even been 20. In hell. And he carried that burden. Those sort of things were the things that I got told. And I think, really, because there wasn't anyone else to tell. So, if people want to talk, I think sometimes you just got to be willing to sit there and listen. No matter how much it confronts you, you've got to just sit there and listen. But anyway, that's another story.